All right, what's up, everybody? It's Compound Corey Brown, Coach Corey from the Big Chair Chess Club. Thanks for joining me again for another video. Why chess is easier than you think, part 4. So right now we just talked about the pawn structure. If you haven't seen the videos prior to this, go check it out. But we're talking about the pawns. Some important things we talked about the pawns is number one, they start off on the second in the 7th row. If you on the light color pieces, they usually start off on the second. Dark color pieces usually start off on the 7th row. If you count, we got 8 pawns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 on each side. And we said that in the beginning of the game, the pawns move 2 spaces on his first turn. Has the option to, at least. Right? Has the choice to move 2 spaces on his first turn. But it can decide that, hey, I don't want to go 2 spaces, right? I only want to go 1. So this is what the pawn is going to do in this situation. The pawn is going to go 1 space in this situation. And what black can do the same, right? So what we have here is a symmetric position, right? A symmetric position is something that looks the same, right? It's symmetrical. It's identical. So this is very important because when we talk about the pawns and how they move and creating lanes for the pieces, usually you see that the same pieces typically can move within the structure. But we'll talk about that, the independencies of that in a second. But essentially, the pawns can move 1 or 2 spaces on its first turn. If it decides to move 2 spaces and it hits a block like this, these are called block pawns, which means that they can't move unless there's a shift that occurs, right? So block pawns are typical positions. It means that you have to find another piece to move, right? So once these become blocked, you have to move one of the other pawns. So let's just say white decides to move to d4, right? d4, right? So we said that with block pawns, it has to be a shift in order for it to move, right? Or you can't, these become immobile, right? So now that the white pawn has come up to a position in which it's addressing the black pawn, you notice it's on the same color and it's in a diagonal to each other, the black and the white pawn, right? So now a shift can occur, right? Because pawns can capture in a diagonal. So because white approach black, right? Black has an option to take the white pawn, right? So let's just say black does that. So this is called a capture. So you capture with pawns in a diagonal, right? They only move in a diagonal when they capture in a piece. So let's do that one more time. So let's just say white forgoes moving 2 spaces and he moves 1. Black decides, hey, cool, I want to munch up another pawn, right? But now it's white's turn. So white can say, I'm getting tired of this. I'm tired of losing material. And he could decide to take the black pawn back. Now, pawns actually have a value, right? It's kind of intrinsic in chess, but pawns are worth 1 point, right? So if we had to count how many points white had versus black, white would have what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 pawns, and black would have 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right? So this looks pretty bad for white if you think about it, right? I just want to point out, we talked about block pawns, right? We talked about pawns that come toward each other and they become blocked because they can't move. We said that pawns can only shift in a block position if they move in a diagonal, which means that they have to capture a piece, right? But if it's no piece to capture, they can't move. Block pawns, right? But now I want to point our attention to something very important that this position shows. This position shows something that's called isolated pawns, right? And isolated pawns are, well, isolated. If you don't know what isolated is they stand alone, right? They don't have any connection to anybody. There's no other pawns to the left or to the right of them, right? This becomes an isolated pawn. And in a mental health aspect of how I look at chess, right? An isolated pawn is similar to, us being isolated in positions, right? In life, where, we can feel isolated, or a teen maybe, a youth can feel isolated because, no, he's not being heard or she's not being heard, right? Maybe you might feel isolated after a breakup. Maybe that you were with a partner for a long time and now it didn't work out. Maybe you're going through a divorce and you feel isolated and you can't talk to anybody. Maybe that you had some friends that turned on you. First y'all was riding and then something happened and then now, you haven't heard from them. Or they switched up, they hanging with the enemy. So now you feel isolated because you don't know who to trust. We see a lot of young young people out here these days that this is the case. They feel isolated because maybe their parents work all the time and they the ones that have to take care of their siblings and they can't trust or depend on anybody, but themselves. So they gonna go out and do what they want to do. So this is a thought, that I correlate strongly to the game of chess, and what I talk about to some of our youth is because, what situations can you identify with that you feel isolated in, right? Because if you can identify situations in which you feel isolation, then maybe that we can connect you to or talk about those experiences and how we can come up with a goal that you don't feel isolated, that we can give you support, right? And this is what I'm going to show you in this position. This is why the pawn is so powerful, right? Because they small in stature, but they got so much significance in how we as people operate, right? How we feel blocked sometimes, how we feel like we can't get around an obstacle, right? And we just sometimes become stuck and we can't move until somebody comes through and gives us that shift, right? Maybe gives us a word, gives us some help, right? So that's a block pawn, but the isolated pawn. Now we talking about how you might feel isolated, how a situation in your life, a circumstance might left you isolated in the past that's now affecting you from moving forward, right? Because how you gonna move forward with an isolated pawn without support, right? And so this is what I want to show you. We talk about support. Now the pawn gets even stronger because support comes through what? Connection. And connected pawns is another position that I want to show you. So you don't always have to stay isolated, right? You finding that group of people that you can talk to. You may be attending a social group. You getting out the house and being around friends, right? You finding a mentor. Maybe you being connected is the solution that you need, right? And this solution comes through a pawn chain, as we call it, right? Or connected pawns. And a pawn chain, you notice that it's stronger because now it has support. And it's usually stronger the more connected that, the more pawns that it is, right? So when you find yourself isolated, find a way to stay connected. That's the message. Find a way to stay connected, right? Don't stay blocked. Don't stay isolated. Find a way to stay connected, right? And even positions like this where you have two pawns side by side, this is called a phalanx, right? But they're still connected. They still can be a chain if they wanted to, right? If they had an option. So, man, I hope this resonated with y'all. I hope that the game is making more sense to y'all. Please go follow Big Chair Chess Club. And I'll see y'all in the next video, man. Stay connected. That's the message. Stay connected.